of the United States, but also in the interest of fairness and justice with which we like to believe we conduct our proceedings here, that the Senate today, across party lines, confirm the nomination of Norm Eisen to be ambassador to the Czech Republic. I thank the chair and yield the floor.
I thank the senator from Connecticut. I yield 2 minutes to the senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
The senator from New Hampshire.
I rise to speak in support of the confirmation of Norm Eisen to be U.S. Ambassador to the Czech Republic. In the years since his recess appointment to this position by President Obama, Ambassador Eisen has proven to be a strong advocate for the United States. He has brought a renewed focus to our defense relations with the Czech Republic, resulting in an expansion of our bilateral and NATO military cooperation, and the Czech Republic has increased its troop contribution in Afghanistan and strongly supported international efforts on Iran and the U.S. policy on Israel with the EU and the United Nations during his tenure. As chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Subcommittee on European Affairs, I had the privilege of chairing both of Ambassador Eisen's nomination hearings. Throughout the nomination process, he has demonstrated a strong understanding of the complexities of our relationship with the Czech Republic, a drive to fully represent American interests and values, and really a special humility in having the opportunity to represent the United States. So I would hope that all of our colleagues in the Senate this evening will join us in supporting Norm Eisen to be the ambassador to the Czech Republic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I thank the senator from New Hampshire.
The senator from Massachusetts.
Mr. President, I thank the senator from New Hampshire very much. I know she needs to cut her time a little bit because we're getting towards the end of these comments with respect to the nominees and to the vote. Likewise, I haven't said anything about either nominee, and I want to say a couple of words about each if I can, and I want to specifically answer a couple of points made by the senator from South Carolina with respect to Maria Aponte. First of all, with respect to Norm Eisen, he has been an extraordinarily effective ambassador for the United States in terms of our relationship with the Czech Republic, and he has, by everybody's measure, he has deepened that partnership on key national security interests, and he's been a key supporter of American economic interests. He has aggressively backed the Westinghouse company's pursuit of a $27 billion contract to construct civilian nuclear reactors in the Czech Republic, and that would mean thousands of jobs here in the United States. The Chamber of Commerce has called him one of the most effective ambassadors to hold this post. He has assisted the Czech government with its plans to develop the Center for Nuclear Safety in Prague, and he has been an eloquent advocate of urging Prague to retain the 600 soldiers that they have sent from the Czech Republic to Afghanistan, making it one of our most supportive NATO allies. He has supported the Czech government's efforts to pool defense resources with neighbors, and he has supported and enhanced the Czech efforts to establish a NATO Center of Excellence for helicopters. And finally, Mr. President, he has enthusiastically supported the Czech leadership's efforts to promote the stabilization and democratization of 6 states between the EU and Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, Belarus, Armenia, Moldova, and Azerbaijan. So I think that in every respect, Ambassador Eisen has earned the respect of the Senate. He understands the culture of the Czech Republic. He speaks the language, which is a critical asset for our ambassadors in any country, in any part of the world. And as was mentioned by the senator from Connecticut, he is the son of a Holocaust survivor from the former Czechoslovakia, and believe me, he understands the history of that part of the world and of that country in a very personal way. I might also comment that the country's leaders trust him. National Review this week said that his efforts have been publicly recognized by innumerable Czech officials, including the leading transatlanticists, Prime Minister Petr Nečas, Foreign Minister Karen Schwarzenberg, and Defense Minister Sasha Vondra. So I hope our colleagues today will recognize that he is exactly the right person that we need in Prague at this time. Now let me speak, if I may, to Ambassador Aponte. I would hate to see the United States Senate take this good person and make her part of the political back and forth that has consumed this city, and to deny her the right to the full appointment as ambassador, given the outstanding job that she has done in that capacity. Among her accomplishments, I mean, let's talk about the accomplishments, rather than talk about something from 1990 that frankly has been vetted several times, not just by the committees in her appointments, but by the professionals in the national security establishment of the United States, who have 3 times, not once, but 3 times given her national security clearances at the highest level. It seems to me that we should recognize that she has done a spectacular job of negotiating an agreement with the Salvadoran government to open a new jointly funded electronic monitoring center to fight transnational crime. She's helped secure the deployment of Salvadoran troops to Afghanistan, the only country in South America and Latin America to be doing so. And I think that is no small accomplishment. It is clear that she has gained the respect of the Salvadoran government. The Foreign Relations Committee has received many letters in support of her nomination, including one signed by 8 former foreign ministers and 18 members of the Salvadoran Congress. Now, we heard the senator from South Carolina a few moments ago say that he wanted somehow to get additional information. Well, Mr. President, I respect, and I think the senator from South Carolina knows this, because I've bent over backwards to try to help provide that information. The first time she was nominated, 2 members of our committee were permitted to look at the FBI report. And we designated Senator Menendez and Senator Barrasso, and they looked at it. And there was nothing in it that struck either of them as restraining people from being able to vote for her. Then she had a recess appointment because Senator DeMint at that time objected to the nomination. And subsequently, with this nomination now, we again were appointing 2 people to go see the FBI record. And on this occasion, we bent the rules. And both Senator Rubio and Senator DeMint were allowed to go look at the FBI record. Now, subsequent to that, we went through a process of trying to schedule the nomination. Senator Lugar and I had agreed that we would try to do so. So Senator DeMint reviewed the background file on November 3rd. Senator Rubio reviewed it on November 7th. Her nomination hearing was held on November 8th. And her nomination was put on the agenda for November 15th committee business meeting. The day of that business meeting, not before it, the day of the meeting, I received a request that her nomination be held over until the next business meeting. I honored that request, and indeed we held it over. That same day, I sent a letter to the members of the Foreign Relations Committee saying that the next business meeting would be rescheduled for 2 weeks later, which was the Tuesday after Thanksgiving, November 29th. Then, late in the Thanksgiving recess, I received a letter asking that it be deferred indefinitely. The stated reason was to permit the committee to hold a closed-door hearing at which we could examine whether the FBI properly conducted its investigation relating to Ms. Aponte, not for her nomination now, not for her nomination, a few months ago or last year, but looking into what the FBI did or didn't do in the 1990s. Now, I understand that everybody's busy. We all have a lot to do around here. But to wait until the 11th hour to ask for a hearing of that sort is frankly puzzling. And carrying out an investigation of the FBI is no small matter. To suggest that on the several occasions that she has received a top-secret clearance, somehow the FBI or the CIA or some other entity in our intelligence community bent under political pressure is insulting to them. And believe me, Mr. President, if that were true, we would have been reading about it on the front pages of the Washington Post or the New York Times or all the papers a long time ago. So let me recap. The background file was reviewed on November 3rd. No request for a closed hearing. Not during the November 8th nomination hearing was there a request for a closed hearing. Not in the written request on November 15th for a holdover was there a request for a closed hearing. And even after the Foreign Relations Committee voted out this nomination, I bent over backwards to try to help Senator DeMint be able to get the answers to his questions, and the White House said that they would make available to him a briefing at the time of his choosing. I have now received a letter from the White House Director of Legislative Affairs. I ask that it be placed in the record. That request was never responded to.
Without objection.
Senator,
and the senator's time has expired.
I thank that I'd simply say that, you know, fair is fair around here. And I don't think that this nominee ought to be the victim of a prolonged delay process. She's done the job well. She deserves to be sent back. And I hope colleagues will not filibuster her nomination today.
Under the previous order, the clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Norman L. Eisen of the District of Columbia to be ambassador to the Czech Republic, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Norman L. Eisen of the District of Columbia to be Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United States to the Czech Republic shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll. The senator from Massachusetts.
I would simply ask unanimous consent before the clerk call the roll that before the Aponte vote there be 2 minutes equally divided of debate.
Is there objection? Seeing none, without any objection, it is granted.
I thank the chair. And
clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander, Ms. Ayotte, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Balkis, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett, Mr. Bingaman, Mr. Blumenthal. Mr. Blunt. Mr. Bozeman. Mrs. Boxer. Mr. Brown of Massachusetts. Mr. Brown of Ohio. Mr. Burr. Ms. Cantwell. Mr. Cardin.
Mr. Carper. Mr. Casey. Mr. Chambliss. Mr. Coates. Mr. Coburn. Mr. Cochran. Ms. Collins. Mr. Conrad. Mr. Coons. Mr. Corker. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Dement. Mr. Durbin. Mr. Enzi. Mrs. Feinstein. Mr. Franken. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mr. Graham. Mr. Grassley. Mrs. Hagan. Mr. Harkin.
That is very funny thought.
Mr. Hatch. Mr. Heller. Mr. Hoven. Mrs. Hutchison. Mr. Inhofe. Mr. Inouye. Mr. Isaacson. Mr. Johans. Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota. Mr. Kerry. Mr. Kirk. Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Cole. Mr. Kyle. Ms. Landrieu. Mr. Lautenberg. Mr. Leahy. Mr. Lee. Mr. Levin. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lugar. Mr. Manchin. Mr. McCain. Mrs. McCaskill. Mr. McConnell. Mr. Menendez. Mr. Merkley. Ms. Mikulski. Mr. Moran. Ms. Murkowski. Mrs. Murray. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska. Mr. Nelson of Florida. Mr. Paul. Mr. Portman. Mr. Pryor. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Risch. Mr. Roberts. Mr. Rockefeller. Mr. Rubio. Mr. Sanders. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Sessions. Mrs. Shaheen. Mr. Shelby. Ms. Snow. Ms. Stabenow. Mr. Tester. Mr. Thune. Mr. Toomey. Mr. Udall of Colorado. Mr. Udall of New Mexico. Mr. Vitter. Mr. Warner. Mr. Webb. Mr. Whitehouse. Mr. Wicker. Mr. Wyden.
Senators voting in the affirmative: Alexander, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Boxer, Brown of Massachusetts, Cantwell, Chambliss, Coates, Collins, Conrad, Corker, Franken, Harkin, Inhofe, Isaacson, Cole, Kyle, Leahy, Lieberman, Lugar, Manchin, McCain, McCaskill, Menendez, Sanders, Shaheen, Tester, Whitehouse. Mr. Inouye, aye. Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, aye. Mr. Durbin, aye. Ms. Landrieu, aye. Ms. Ayotte, aye. Mr. Kerry, aye. Senators voting in the negative: Barrasso, DeMint, Grassley, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, McConnell, Roberts, Vitter. Mr. Paul, no. Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, aye. Mr. Casey, aye. Mr. Webb, aye. Mr. Wicker, no. Mr. Warner, aye. Mr. Crapo, no. Mr. Coons, aye. Mr. Akaka, aye. Mr. Pryor, aye. Mr. Cochran, no. Mr. Levin, aye. Mr. Brown of Ohio, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, aye.
Mr. Cardin. Mr. Cardin, aye. Mr. Bozeman. Mr. Bozeman, no. Mr. Enzi. Mr. Enzi, no. Mrs. Hagan. Mrs. Hagan, aye. Mr. Hatch. Mr. Hatch, aye. Ms. Snow, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mr. Toomey, aye. Mrs. Hutchison, aye. Mr. Shelby, aye. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Mr. Rockefeller, aye. Mr. Carper, aye. Mr. Portman, aye. Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, aye. Mrs. Feinstein, aye. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Mr. Nelson of Florida, aye. Mr. Lautenberg, aye. Mr. Bennett, aye. Mr. Rubio, no. Mr. Sessions, aye. Mr. Hoven, aye. Ms. Markowski, aye. Mr. Risch, no. Mr. Begich. Mr. Begich. Aye. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray. Aye. Ms. Stabenow. Ms. Stabenow. Aye. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Mr. Reed of Nevada. Aye. Mr. Schumer. Mr. Schumer. Aye.
Are there any senators wishing to vote or change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 70, the nays are 16, 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn having voted in the affirmative. The motion is agreed to. Yeah. On the previous order, the question of prayers on the nomination.
Were the yeas and nays ordered on that? No, you don't know. Just let them do it. I would ask we have a voice vote. Yeah.
Question is on nomination. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed? Ayes appear to have it. Ayes do have it. Nomination is confirmed. There will now be 2 minutes of debate prior to the next one.
We have order.
Order in the Senate. Please take your conversations outside. Order in the Senate.
President, I yield 1 minute to the senator from New Jersey, Senator Menendez.
Without objection. Senator from New Jersey. Order. Can we have order, please? Please, Mr. Chairman. Senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, Mary Carmen Aponte is an excellently qualified Latina who is being politically discriminated against, despite a record of accomplishment for the United States in El Salvador, which is universally recognized as extraordinary, from getting Salvadorian troops to fight alongside with us, the only Latin American country to do so, to creating a new monitoring center to fight transnational crime, to suggest that the FBI and diplomatic security would give her not one, but two top-secret clearances that were not merited is the ultimate insult to those agencies. It is simply wrong to use alleged, nameless, faceless accusers to falsely impugn her reputation. I urge my colleagues to allow an up or down vote on her nomination and to vote for cloture so we can get to that vote to put this qualified Latina to continue to work on behalf of the United States and El Salvador as she has successfully done.
Who yields the time?
Mr. President,
Senator from South Carolina.
all of us regret when there's a situation where one of us has to oppose a nomination of a president. And 1,198 nominations have gone through without being contested here, but this is one that rises to the level of concern. Republicans have been asking questions about this nominee for months, in fact, much longer than that, going back to why she refused to take a lie detector test, why she withdrew her name when she was first nominated for ambassador under Clinton, and why the files have not been properly updated. We have asked the White House for just private meetings with the FBI and CIA to give us updated knowledge of what happened in these circumstances so that we could make a good decision. But there was never an offer to do that. We had offers of low-level folks to come talk to us, only to me, not to Republicans on the committee. But there are enough questions here for honest answers, and we have not gotten them. I encourage my colleagues to vote against this
Senator's time has expired.
Thank you.
Mr. President, do we have any time left?
No time left, sir. Under the previous order, the clerk will report the motion to invoke cloture.
Cloture motion. We, the undersigned senators, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 22 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, hereby move to bring to a close the debate on the nomination of Carmen Aponte of the District of Columbia to be ambassador to the Republic of El Salvador, signed by 17 senators.
By unanimous consent, the mandatory quorum call has been waived. The question is it the sense of the Senate that debate on the nomination of Carmen Aponte of the District of Columbia to be Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the United States of America to the Republic of El Salvador shall be brought to a close? The yeas and nays are mandatory under the rule. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka, Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte. Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Baucus, Mr. Begich, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Bingaman. Mr. Blumenthal, Mr. Blunt,
Yours might have been, I think yours takes the cake so
Mr.
far.
Bozeman,
It has more artistic,
Mrs. Boxer,
touch to it.
Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey, Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates, Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mrs. Boxer, Mr. Brown of Massachusetts, Mr. Brown of Ohio, Mr. Burr, Ms. Cantwell, Mr. Cardin, Mr. Carper, Mr. Casey,
You want to do it?
Mr. Chambliss, Mr. Coates,
I'm a spotter.
Mr. Coburn, Mr. Cochran,
Not 6%.
no, no. Mr. Cochran, Ms. Collins, Mr. Conrad, Mr. Coons,
Snow on your parade.
Mr. Corker,
Oh, my God.
Mr. Cornyn,
I feel so much better now.
Mr. Crapo, Mr. DeMint, Mr. Durbin, Mr. Enzi, Mrs. Feinstein, Mr. Franken, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mrs. Hagan, Mr. Harkin, Mr. Hatch, Mr. Heller, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Hoven, Mrs. Hutchison, Mr. Inhofe, Ms. Inoue, Mr. Isaacson, Mr. Johans, Mr. Johnson of Wisconsin, Mr. Johnson of South Dakota, Mr. Carey, Mr. Kirk, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Cole, Mr. Kyle, Ms. Landrieu, Mr. Lautenberg, Mr. Leahy, Mr. Lee, Mr. Levin, Mr. Lieberman, Mr. Lugar, Mr. Manchin, Mr. McCain, Mrs. McCaskill, Mr. McConnell, Mr. Menendez, Mr. Merkley, Ms. Mikulski, Mr. Moran, Ms. Murkowski, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Nelson of Nebraska, Mr. Nelson of Florida, Mr. Paul, Mr. Portman, Mr. Pryor, Mr. Reed of Rhode Island, Mr. Reed of Nevada, Mr. Risch, Mr. Roberts, Mr. Rockefeller, Mr. Rubio, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schumer.
I'm going to hit your bell for you. Okay?
Thank you.
McCain here.
Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Shelby, Ms. Snow, Ms. Stabenow, Mr. Tester, Mr. Thune, Mr. Toomey, Mr. Udall of Colorado, Mr. Udall of New Mexico, Mr. Vitter, Mr. Warner, Mr. Webb, Mr. Whitehouse,
I don't have any
Mr.
pledges,
Wicker,
so I haven't set that down. So I'll send- Now,
Senators voting in the affirmative: Akaka, Begich, Bennett, Bingaman, Blumenthal, Boxer, Brown of Massachusetts, Brown of Ohio, Cantwell, Cardin, Carper, Casey, Collins, Conrad, Coons, Durbin, Feinstein, Franken, Gillibrand, Hagan, Harkin, Inouye, Johnson of South Dakota, Kerry, Klobuchar, Cole, Landrieu, Lautenberg, Leahy, Levin, Manchin, McCaskill, Menendez, Murray, Nelson of Florida, Pryor, Reed of Rhode Island, Reed of Nevada, Rockefeller, Sanders, Schumer, Shaheen, Stabenow, Tester, Warner, Webb, and Whitehouse. Senators voting in the negative: Alexander, Ayotte, Barrasso, Bozeman, Chambliss, Coates, Corker, Crapo, DeMint, Enzi, Grassley, Hatch, Hoven, Hutchison, Inhofe, Isaacson, Johans, Johnson of Wisconsin, Kyle, Lugar, McCain, McConnell, Murkowski, Nelson of Nebraska, Paul, Portman, Risch, Roberts, Sessions, Shelby, Toomey, Vitter, and Wicker. Mr. Lieberman. Mr. Lieberman, aye. Mr. Udall of Colorado, aye. Mr. Udall of New Mexico, aye. Ms. Snow? Ms. Snow, no. Mr. Cochran? Mr. Cochran? No. Mr. Rubio? Mr. Rubio? No. Mr. Reed? Mr. Reed of Nevada? No.
Are there any senators wishing to vote or change their vote? If not, on this vote, the yeas are 49, the nays are 37. 3/5 of the senators duly chosen and sworn, not having voted in the affirmative, the motion is